Hi everyone, this is Ronnie with Everything Vive, and I'm here today speaking with two gentlemen from One Hamsa, the studio behind Racket NX. Uh, Assaf and Dave are both here with me. Hi gentlemen, how are you guys doing today?
Hey,
Very good, very
yeah,
good.
we're
How are
doing
you?
good.
Doing great. So I'm excited to talk about Racket NX because this is a game actually that I've been playing for quite a while. I was just to give you a little bit of background on when I was looking at Steam to try to figure out exactly when you had first released, and it looked like you had a demo out as far back as like mid 2016. I'm not sure if it was even earlier than that, but I jumped on board. I purchased the game on early access back in February of 2017. So
Ah, nice.
I've had the game for a while, and I actually heard that you guys were releasing the official release, the build in July of this year, 2018. And so I thought, man, this would be a great opportunity to get a chance to talk to you guys after the release and find out more about the game, because really, I mean, and we'll get into this more in just a moment. Racket NX is probably one of the most polished games that I've played in any of the high-end VR headsets. I mean, as far as like from a gameplay standpoint as well as like audio visuals. I mean, really, it's kind of on a level all to its own. So I wanted to congratulate you guys on such wonderful work and yeah.
Thanks a lot. It means a lot to hear that.
Yeah.
Thank
So,
you.
so yeah, no, of course, the pleasure's all mine to be able to speak with you guys. So, if you could just, for our listeners, kind of give us your backgrounds, how you got into VR, how you started One Hamza, and the story behind Racket NX.
Yeah, sure. So Racket NX actually started as a tech demo, as part of a cooperation between us and a company named Waves Audio, which is quite famous in the pro audio community for manufacturing and creating pro audio plugins for the music industry. So they asked us early 2016 to create a tech demo for a new plugin they developed, which is called NX. This plugin provides 360 degrees audio, what we call special audio, and they wanted to demo it. And that was actually the starting point for this project. It started as kind of a jam before CES 2016, and the results were so positive that it actually pushed Waves to move on together with us and turn Racket into a full-blown game.
Huh. So just curious. I mean, what was your background up to that point? Like, why did Wave seek out you guys specifically? Do you think for this type of, because obviously that was very early on in VR. So I'm just kind of curious how that partnership started.
So I guess for us, we've been working as friends on games of our own in our extra time for like maybe
5 years.
Yeah, 5 years.
Yeah.
We met at a game jam,
Okay.
at a global game jam to be specific, and we kind of fell in love with each other, and
Okay.
we've been developing things on the side since then.
Yeah.
And so this is really like the side projects that we've been developing during this time are really what allowed us to claim any merit towards Waves and really kind of show them that we might actually know what we're doing. So that's, first of all, some prerequisite. And if anyone who is listening is is an aspiring game developer or game artist or whatever, the advice that I always give is do as much as you can extracurricularly, and just if you want to have some job in the future, you really need to prove to the world that you can do it, and you have to invest your own time in that.
Exactly. Don't wait for them to come to you, but just do it. Just start by your own.
Yeah, but back to the issue. we had some friends in Waves and who are basically as technically enthusiastic as ourselves. And when they started understanding what they need to do with the NX plugin and that VR is probably the best way to feature it, then they contacted us, and of course we were very enthusiastic about it as well. This was an opportunity to get into VR that was just starting out, and we were extremely excited about it. And things really clicked well from the very beginning with regards to that. I think we started working just like a few months after we started talking about it initially. A very short time. It was just like touch and go.
So, to our credit, I can say that from the very beginning, we told Waves that it's gonna be a game.
We were aiming at making a game from the beginning.
It took them a couple of months to get it and to see how serious we were,
but again, maybe it's worth mentioning here that this is the same kind of attitude I was just mentioning a few sentences ago. It's just like always do the extra, because otherwise things don't happen. And if we didn't approach this opportunity to do a demo for NX as an opportunity to make a game, and if we didn't do the extra few miles, which were actually more than an extra few miles because we invested a lot of our own time and effort in this, then we won't be able to prove to Waves that there is real potential to make a game here and to use that game to show their technology in a favorable way. And so it would probably ended in a technical demo if that is all that we would be aspiring to at that point.
We basically pushed a 25 years old company that specializes in creating pro audio plugins to be a publisher. So
for the first time
for the first time.
That's amazing. So right away, I mean, they obviously were interested in getting into VR and all of that. From your standpoint, what did that technology like? When you knew that this was the task in front of you to create a game that also utilized this audio technology, what was the development process like to figure out what type of a gameplay experience would work best with that in mind?
Yeah, so it actually changed a little bit from the tech demo to the first demo that you played. And yeah, you were correct. The first demo did actually come out somewhere in mid-2016. Initially, the onus was very heavily on audio itself. And the idea was there's no way you can play this without audio. So if you're familiar with the game, one of the features in the game is portals, where there's parts of the wall, if you hit the ball into them, they kind of disappear and appear randomly in some other part around you. And audio really helps you locate them and know where they're coming from. So in the original demo, this was kind of one of the major things,
major feature,
because it really put forth NX's ability to pinpoint audio spatially. But the more it became a game, the more these mechanics were basically gave way to game mechanics. And in the final version, we actually hardly use portals because they really kill the game's flow. And we feel that the game is robust enough to show NX in a favorable light, even without it being so, without it spoon-feeding the players, basically. And of course, our own motivation was make a good game, whereas in the beginning, it was make a good demo for NX.
And that was basically our premise to Waves from the very beginning. We said, if you want us to help push your brand, your plugin brand for the matter, the best thing we can do is to create an awesome gaming experience that will expose your capabilities. And
so the tricky part was really, at least in terms of the initial conception, to come up with a concept that on the one hand is very heavy in displaying the NX abilities, and yet has the basic mechanics that will allow us to fully develop it into a game if Waves were indeed so inclined.
And early on, correct me if I'm wrong, but was the title originally released just for Steam and the Vive, or did it include Oculus support from the beginning? I just wasn't. I guess when you guys initially launched, the Oculus Touch hadn't been released yet, correct?
Yeah. The demo and early access one was Vive exclusive, and And Oculus joined the party, I think, July 2017, something like that.
Okay, because just something that's like popping into my brain trying to think of all these timelines and everything is the fact that I guess when you guys released on the Vive originally, there wasn't any kind of deluxe audio head strap or anything like that for the Vive. So was it challenging at all to make sure that players were, especially early on in the demo stages, making sure to tell them to wear headphones or something like that to really take advantage of the spatial audio features, or what was?
Well, the game from the very beginning has two warnings at the beginning, or two like notes. One of them is be really careful, because as opposed to other games, this is a 360-degree game.
Yep.
I'm glad to say that players usually get into it, and then it's easy to forget about yourself for a little bit and hit stuff.
Yep.
This was especially true in the beginning where people weren't yet used to VR, but it's still true to a certain degree.
Yeah.
And the other note was use your audio. So we kind of tried hammering that in at the beginning of the game. You have these two notes showing clearly. Probably if we would have done it now, it would have been more visually shown, etc. But really in VR, because the experience is all about immersion, or in a large part about immersion, you don't really find yourself having to tell people to put headphones on. It's kind of the default.
Okay. No, that's good to... Yeah, and I guess getting a little bit into the gameplay itself, because obviously that was a major focus for you guys just from day one, making sure that the game was fun. What was it like, I guess, balancing player skill versus accessibility in an early VR title? Because, like you were mentioning, people were not only new to your game, but they were new to the medium as a whole. So what advantages did that give you as a developer to kind of open the field, but what also did you guys want to do to kind of ease people into the experience?
So let's talk just about the physics for a moment and the basics mechanics of the game. So I'm disregarding the game rules for the time being.
Sure.
Such as like what you should be hitting with the ball, what you shouldn't, and just focusing on like the racket itself, the ball itself,
Yep.
the arena. One of the feedbacks that we've been getting the most from the beginning is that a lot of people showed this game as the go-to game for introducing people into VR. And the reason for that is that in its most rudimentary premise, you have a racket, you have a ball, and everyone knows what to do about it. All right? So the very, very basic settings, and this is also was kind of necessary because this is where VR was when we initially conceptualized the game, is the settings that is relatively known from real world experience.
Real world mechanics.
From real world mechanics, from the mechanics of reality, and so I think that on the very rudimentary level, it's kind of self-explanatory. The game rules, on the other hand, is something that isn't as clear to explain. They're not complicated, but they're not easily explained. And this is something actually one of our biggest, let's say, lessons from Racket. We can talk about that later a little bit if you're interested. But going back to your original question regarding mastery and nuance and skill, from the very get-go, we saw Racket as a game of skill. It's a mechanical game. There's very little lore. There's very little narrative. It's about mechanics. It's a sport game. One of the things that, to me, I find like maybe the most rewarding about Racket is your personal improvement curve as a player. You go in the first time, you kind of muck things up. Second time you're in, you already feel like you can really control things. Third time around, you feel like you're really learning a new motor skill. So besides the fact that is healthy and good for your brain and something that I find valuable as a human being, I think that it's also like the major driving reward factor in the game. It's just improving, feeling you get this control, this flow, this kind of communion with the ball and the racket. That's always been our highest priority. How do we put players in flow, and how do we make the game simple enough so that they can really focus on the mechanics, but sophisticated enough so that there's always more skill and nuance to develop, and that nuance actually matters. If I hit the ball slightly like this or slightly like that. It actually makes a difference in the more advanced stages of the game.
And going off of that idea for a moment, like you talked about, making sure that the mechanics on one hand were natural and kind of intuitive for players, that it felt like a real world interaction, so that you didn't really have to, kind of figure things out from square one from the beginning. But like you said, there's also it seems like you guys took really advantage of what the VR medium allows you to do in terms of you stretched those physics to like kind of extraordinary kind of the player has an ability to control the ball in ways that you wouldn't be able to do in real life. Like the most immediate changes actually that I noticed from playing one of the early demos to how the game plays now, things like being able to pull the ball back to your racket, being able to kind of twist the ball in a way, like when you hit the ball at certain angles where the ball actually, will kind of track along the wall and hit multiple, panels before coming back to you. Yeah. Like all that stuff feels really great. And like you said, like as a player, you get that feeling that it was you that, it was your skill that made the ball do what you're trying to get it to do. Like what were some of those things that you added to the real world physics that you wouldn't be able to do in a real world racquetball game that made the game as fun as it is?
So first of all, the trick about making it feel like it was actually your skill that let you land that shot, is have it actually be your skill. Right? So it's always been for us. It's always been like, we're gonna make things.
We're gonna start from reality, but we take it one step further.
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things that we can say about the physics and what we did with them. First of all is our approach was trying to understand intentionality and only filling in the blanks when you feel that something should have happened but didn't. So for example, the racket's collision box, right, where what detects whether or not it hit the ball, changes slightly dynamically according to the speed and the distance the racket has from you, because oftentimes we'd notice that even though you feel you should have hit the ball, you didn't, even though physically you shouldn't have hit the ball. All right, so there's a bunch of little things like that. The ball always returns to your general vicinity, for example. That's also not physically accurate.
Yeah.
All right, but there's a bunch of things that don't go into the realms of like aim assist or stuff like that, but definitely keep the game a little more, let's say, predictable. All right, in terms of like how the physics reacts to what you do. Then, like the two mechanics that you mentioned, one of them is the trigger, the pull mechanic, or what we call the tractor beam, and the other is what we call a power shot that lets the ball out the walls. I don't actually know exactly the evolution of those things. I mean, I remember part of how they were conceived and all that, but it was just kind of saying, all right, we have these basic dynamics here. We have these basic physics in that are like the real world, but I'm not interested in the real world. This is VR. Yeah. What else can I do?
Exactly. That's the premise for us. I mean, to being able to do things that you can do in real world.
Yeah. So there's a lot of one of the things that I'm personally pretty perplexed by is a lot of realistic simulators in VR where you're just kind of trying to emulate a real life experience that you could get in real life quite easily.
Yeah.
That's something that like.
So why would you use VR?
Yeah, I don't
No, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, but one more thing I'd like to say about that. I think we've been like from the very first jam where we kind of tried figuring out what the game was. There was a certain mental framework that we've been trying to stick by, and that's been like trying to capitalize on the system's strong points and trying to own its weak points. And how that comes to play in terms of physics, for example, is so the strong points of the Vive and the Oculus 2 actually is really good tracking. That means you can afford to have really nuanced physics. So that's on the one hand. There's more, but that's like maybe the major thing. The weak spot is maybe locomotion. And you'll see that in Racket, the whole game is built around the fact that you don't need to move around. We don't really like locomotion as it is in VR yet. We feel like it hasn't been really cracked yet, even though we're trying our own stuff and we see everyone's attempts to do it, and some are better than others. It's still the weakest point in the system as far as I can tell.
Yeah.
And in Racket, we were just kind of, all right, let's not try solving everything at once. Let's own this weakness and just say that you actually don't need to move around. If you have a 2x2 meters play space and you're not too flaily, you can actually play the game without any problem whatsoever, and you don't need to move around.
Yeah, the better you get in the game, the less you need to move. You can just spin around 360 and yeah.
No, that's interesting. So I mean, something that you mentioned while you were talking was, taking advantage of the VR medium, like not just recreating, and I know you did that from a mechanic standpoint, adding in all types of extra control for the player and all of that. Another thing though that really makes the game stand out is the audio and visuals, like we had kind of mentioned on the audio front. But looking at the visuals specifically, there's something about what you guys created here that, I mean, more so than most other games that I've played, there's just something about the graphics that really pop. And it's hard to explain because, like I said, I've tried hundreds of games in VR, right? And there's other games that take a similar approach to you guys. That's kind of more, stylized, not necessarily flat, but there are a lot of developers out there that kind of understand that, you don't want things to be too confusing to the players, and you want to make things bright and obvious so that they know what's going on. But something about the way you guys, approached it, not only does it perform really well, but everything looks super high fidelity and really like I said, I can't think of anything besides just saying that those glows and the colors, they really just jump out at you while you're playing. Can you talk a little bit about how you developed the visuals and the graphic style for the game?
Sure. So first of all, thank you. Personally, that's also been my domain in the game. So there's two aspects to this, and the first one is more technical maybe, and that's more relating to what you asked. And if you're interested, we can get to the second one as well. But let's start with the easier part.
Okay.
So we've had it pretty easy because Racket's premise doesn't require characters and vast landscapes and things that you can find in games like, Quiver or Raw Data or any of these kind of games, all right? So whenever you're approaching something that people know from real life, especially in VR, since you have really short production cycles, really low budgets, and really, really high performance requirements, that can really put you in a difficult position. So we've been pretty lucky in that respect, in that the game is very arcadey in its very essence, and that allows you to kind of stylize things as you mentioned. The other thing is, very early on, we noticed that one of the weak points of VR, as much as it's fun the first time, is that the displays are pretty low resolution, and anti-aliasing is pretty weak, and super sampling is pretty expensive. So from the very beginning, it was clear to me that we need to work with relatively big shapes, relatively high contrast. We can't leave too much to just the smooth fidelity of screens and stuff like that, because that just didn't exist very well in VR. So that was also a driving factor in the visuals. The last thing maybe on that is that because we have such a controlled environment in Racket, where it's not an open world, it's this small world that's built around you, etc., it really allowed us to cheat on every front. So every piece every object you see has its own shader that's been specifically defined for the angles that you see it in. The reflections are hand placed, and all this kind of stuff is really we kind of had it easy in that respect.
No, yeah, because no, everything looks great. I mean, one of the things, like I played the game obviously without messing with the settings first, and then afterwards went in, and I have I'm able to run the settings pretty high. So I turned down the anti-aliasing actually, and then turned up the super sampling just to see how everything would perform. And the two things I noticed is, one, for me anyways, performance was the same. So I was able to crank up the super sampling and it still performed great on my system. But then the second thing is really like it looked better, but I think it made me realize how great it looked to begin with, even without the super sampling. Cool. So I mean, just one of those things.
We invested a lot of time in optimization. We actually got the game running at 90 frames per second on a nuke. And on a WMR system, if I remember correctly.
Yeah.
What kind of GPU? Like I'm familiar with it, but I don't know what kind of graphic capabilities it has.
I think it's a 960 or 970,
Okay.
but actually
I'm not sure which one, but
but actually I think the bottleneck was the CPU.
Yeah.
Okay. Wow.
And again, not to take too much credit for this because we do have a really closed environment. It's just a lot of optimizations. Our partners who are tech guys are really good at their jobs. And that really helps. And we always played the game on weak systems. So that's also kind of forces you to do things in an optimized fashion.
Okay. In terms of, because we spoke a little bit more about the technical side of things, and I do want to mention like a lot of the little effects, like how the reflectivity of the racket itself and all that stuff all looks amazing. So all the little details I think really do shine in the final product. But getting away from the technical side more to like the choices you guys made stylistically. What were some of the factors there?
All right, so there was a bit of a arc in the visuals. If any of the listeners remember or have seen it, the game actually came out with quite a different look and feel. Mm-hmm. It came out with this kind of rusty green 80s retro kind of look to it. Mm-hmm. And in early access 2, which was mid last year,
July,
we actually did a huge makeover for basically the entire game, where the style went a lot more slick, sport, sci-fi, neon. Mm-hmm. All right. Mm-hmm. The color palette changed, the materials changed, the UI changed, the fonts changed. We really did a top down there. So the thing that led up to that is that because of the nature of the development that we described earlier, where it started as a tech demo and really kind of opened up our budget a little bit at a time, we never got the opportunity to do things in a organized way where we have proper pre-production, we understand what the game is about, we kind of derive an art Bible from that and do everything top down. We never got the chance to do that. So it's been more of an evolutionary process. And in evolution, you kind of carry your mistakes, let's put it that way. Mm-hmm. So by the time we had the first early access build out, we found ourselves with a visual style that, while seemed pretty coherent and seemed like it was pretty like solid, for me as the artist, I had a very hard time extrapolating it into more.
Yeah, it couldn't hold the amount of content, of extra content that we want to.
Yeah, suddenly we needed more UI, suddenly we needed more effects in the game, suddenly we needed more visuals, and the visuals that we already had weren't solid enough, weren't coherent enough, didn't have strong enough underlying principles for me to derive a wider design. So I kind of understood that I need to do a makeover. The process was a little weird because I knew I needed to do it for a while. And then I had a short vacation in Italy. I came back, and the first week I was just a wreck. I was half depressed. I was hazy. I had my head hurt all day long.
Oh, man.
I thought it was caffeine withdrawal because I stopped drinking coffee that week.
Yeah.
Okay.
But it was just like I was having. In retrospect, it was just mental constipation.
Oh, man.
So yeah, and then what happened was. On the weekend of that week, after all week, I don't know what the hell is happening and why I can't think straight. I went to this party, which is common practice for me, and came back home after 6 hours of dancing like a maniac, and these are usually like my best moments for creativity.
Okay.
And so I come back home, and before I even get to go to the shower, this image dawns at me in my mind. And it's like a microwave going, ding, your food is ready. Just sit down and write this down. And I just had this image of the logo for the game incorporating all the elements that I then at that moment understood need to be the core elements of the new design. So this was kind of brewing in my head for a week and kind of disabling all other function apparently.
Wow.
But it really came to me like a revelation or dictation, which I love when that shit happens.
Yeah.
And so I came the beginning of the next week. I just came to work with this image of a new logo. I showed it to everyone, explained what the elements were and why and what their significance is, and how each one of the elements communicates. One of the aspects that we want the game's brand to communicate. So sport and arcade and sci-fi basically, and slick. Mm-hmm. And then there was a process of a few months where it was just disseminating this principle into practice, and just converting this initial vision into practicality. And we got a bunch of conflicting feedback when we came out. A lot of people were pretty pissed at us. We're like, "Where's my green tiles? Where's the this? Where's the that?" I think 90% of them completely converted after playing for a few hours, and I was pretty relieved about that. Some people still preferred the original scheme, and I totally liked it as well. I loved it, and I missed parts of it as well. But it was simply not scalable. At least I couldn't scale it. So
No,
so there's
no. Continue, please.
No, that's basically it. The moment I had a good first principles, let's call it, for the visual design, it wasn't an easy process, but it was doable. It was scalable. It was coherent. It was comprehensible. So
if you could speak to that a little bit more, like what was what type of scalability were you looking at? Like I know you mentioned it a little bit before, like as far as like theming and kind of pulling everything together, but was it just like having a core, like a UI that could allow for all these different types of modes that were in your head? Like what were you thinking the game needed to become that was being held back?
Yeah, I don't remember. So first of all, I didn't really like the logo. It felt pretty amateurish. But other than that, there were just a few areas that needed work or that were going to need work, and that I was kind of stumped on. So one of them was UI, and we had a really, really, really basic UI in the beginning, and also very uninspired, I felt. And that was a huge domain that I just didn't have the tools with the existing UI to develop. Then there were a bunch of game elements that I found it difficult to develop. New hex types, new tile types. Power-ups, which we wanted to start implementing. It took us longer than we intended, but we started thinking about them already then. I don't remember specifically what other elements were like the big ones that I couldn't extrapolate, but there were a bunch of them. Basically it was just we got to the limit of what the previous design allowed.
We redid the entire arena, actually.
We did that's actually true. We redid the entire arena.
Yeah.
I think there was kind of a conceptual shift as well, because for this, I think maybe one of the key words for us going from early access 1 to early access 2 is flow. All right. The first early access, the ball would bounce around a lot before reaching you. There were lots of portals that really killed the rhythm. the plow mechanic where the ball kind of plows the walls when you power shot it, where the ball often just bumped into the edge of the arena and bumped back to you.
Mm-hmm.
So it was very like staccato kind of gameplay, very disjoint breakbeat kind of rhythm.
Yeah.
And I really wanted to change that and make the game a lot more fluid and give it the rhythm that is necessary for you to really get into the zone.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the things we did is open the arena up, curve the walls, make everything more flowy, more round, less bouncy, make the ball come back to you a lot faster, move a bunch of the portals. And then this was also a concept that I tried communicating through the visual design. So everything is a lot more slick, a lot cleaner, a lot more flowy. It's still an arcade, it's still sci-fi, it's still sports, so there's some blockiness to it and some sharp edges, and it's dynamic. I think that's maybe one of the key words of that of the difference between Early Access 1 and 2.
Yeah, if I remember correctly, we also introduced the extrudes in Early Access 2.
Oh yeah,
which took us to the direction of pinball that we were looking for.
That's true. That's true. That was the second thing. Yeah.
We're iterating around the.
Man, good times.
No, yeah, and I remember because I played that early version, and I played, as you guys made changes, and obviously the one that was eventually released, and yeah, like you were saying, almost like a pinball kind of. The flow state is so much more. Yeah, before I felt like I was more exploring and that was part of the Vive being new too. I was exploring my room scale, my play area a little bit more in the game, kind of like following the ball and kind of tracking it with my eyes and figuring out where it was going to be. And now it's kind of like you don't even have to, you're not even thinking about where you're moving or anything like that. You're literally just kind of, you know the ball, you're waiting for your next kind of load up to then, figure out where you're going to hit the ball next and not necessarily worrying about anything. So it's like
it's really cool to hear.
That's the best feedback that we can get.
Yeah, because
really nice.
No,
yeah.
I was gonna say because one of the things, at least for me, like the differences that you notice in how you play games and how the design is kind of impacting that is, whereas before, you like you said, the I would say the stage felt a little bit bigger. You were kind of moving around the stage a lot more, kind of figuring out. Now because of the flow that you get in these, each specific challenge that you're trying to complete feels a little bit more self-contained and like you get that immediate satisfaction of being able to, like, from the time that you start playing till the moment you finish the challenge, it kind of just like disappear. Like it just happens so quickly in your head because you're so engaged the entire time that the downtime isn't looking around for the ball. The downtime is moving through the menus to get to the next challenge.
Cool.
So it's like you're going from challenge to challenge to challenge now. Whereas before it was more the lull in the gameplay itself that was the slowdown.
Mm-hmm. So, I think what we're seeing, what you're describing, is pretty unique in the gaming experience, in the sense that we were actually exploring the hardware just in the same way that you were exploring the hardware.
Yeah.
And just like you got to a point where, all right, I get the basics, right? And what now? We got to that point together with our audience, exactly. And I think that can be said to a lot of VR games that started out early, right?
Yeah.
So for us, it's been pretty weird and cool. It's like, oh, we have this cool thing working, and then we put it out, and that's maybe the first version of Racket. And then it's all right. So we got over the initial hardware hype of like, this is novel and interesting. What needs to be improved here? And that's exactly what we tried improving for the second version. And this is a continuous process. That's one of the reasons that we defined to ourselves that we are a VR only, or let's say a VR AR only gaming studio, is because being involved in this process of introducing new and radically different hardware into the ecosystem of gaming, and being able to kind of ride this wave and and with all its implications of like the dynamics of it, the innovation of it, the room for exploration that it allows for, the pioneering that it allows for. It's just fantastic to us. And looking forward at the games that we're working on now and imagining for the future, it's yet another iteration of you know, tightening things up. All right, we got over this too. We know how to make a flowing mechanic in VR. We know how to make something that's intuitive and fun. Now let's make a real game, like with a world to explore and a story to tell, and characters to love. And that's like, for us, that's the next step in VR gaming. That's really what we're also looking for to see happening around us.
Man, okay, so you just opened a whole new can of worms there with that, because initially I was gonna go down that track. Like, I'm interested to hear more about your perspective on what it was like to develop a game while, like, for platforms that were very much in such an early, you know, kind of foundational moment for their development. Like, I mean, I don't think there's really been anything quite, I mean, not in decades really has there been like a medium like VR where literally it was released to consumers almost as a development kit, in the sense of there hadn't really been any full products or any kind of full you know, software products out to really see what was successful and what wasn't, and what their approach was going to be. It was kind of all on everyone to figure out. So I'm curious. So let's talk about that first. What I mean, did things go down a completely different direction than what you had initially anticipated in VR, or what's your kind of outlook on all of that?
So we're laughing here.
It's a funny question.
Maybe I'd start by saying that developing for VR is not for the faint of heart.
Yeah.
Things are extremely volatile. Understanding the users is very different than in other games, because this is a developing community, and it's not representative of the gamer population at large. It's a subsection, and it's not homogeneous. And also, you really need to be light on your feet, because everything is changing so fucking quickly.
All the time.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. I'm not sure if I'm allowed to swear here.
No, go ahead. Do it.
I forget how it goes with Americans.
No. Feel free to say whatever you want to say.
All right. So that's like maybe my initial thing. But do you have anything to say about like how it panned out?
Let's say we predicted that's following the hype that started 2016. We're gonna have a slope on 2017, and actually the first half of 2018 didn't bring anything new yet in terms of let's say hardware or very notable titles, except of Beat Saber maybe.
Yeah. But I feel that Beat Saber is kind of a summary of all that we've learned about VR so far.
Yeah.
And it's not so much a.
I've seen people compare Racket NX to Beat Saber, in that like the flow states, the visual style, like all of these like elements that I think are very cohesive and engaging players in VR, are something I think that people have attributed to both games. So.
Yeah, that's cool. We are really kind of waiting for new stuff on two fronts. One of them is hardware. And obviously, we're looking at mobile VR, and we're looking at Knuckles, and we're looking at higher definition and all these kind of things. New technologies in this, really, because we see a lot of things and following a lot of things in AR and VR, except for the Santa Cruz, kind of seems stuck a little bit right now, hardware-wise.
Yeah, I think that.
And the other side, we're waiting to see. We're not really waiting, because we're doing it ourselves as well. But we'd also really like to start seeing actual games in VR, because this is all nice, this is all fun. But when I compare the quality of the personal experience that I get from Pancake games and those that I get from the current VR games, the current VR games are very much first-gen games, right? And, barring like Skyrim and Fallout and these games that are just adapted, basically. I'm waiting to see how other people actually start telling stories in VR and incorporating what we've learned about VR mechanics in these stories. And this is something that's pretty complicated right now because the budgets are still a problem.
Yeah.
And the population is still relatively small. But I think that we've learned so many basics about how to do certain things in VR that it's really time that we start using the medium in this way. And I think that it has the potential to be extremely powerful in terms of storytelling because of the immersion and because of the devotion that it takes. Just putting your headset on and forgetting about reality already commits you in a certain way. And this really allows, I think, for a certain amount of like storytelling that we haven't really experienced in Pancake games. So
yeah. You know, it's really fascinating that you guys are so focused on character and story, because it's almost like with this medium, you see these waves of people that are in their own kind of silos, figuring out things for themselves, like kind of separately and in different ways from each other, but almost in the same kind of cadence. I've done like countless numbers of these interviews now with all kinds of developers from all over the world. And I wouldn't say until, it really just like the last several months, all of a sudden I've been hearing a lot of talk about story and character in VR.
Nice.
That's because it's time.
Yeah, it's really fascinating. And like I said, everybody has kind of a different approach to it, but it's similar in that I think it tells you kind of where, all of these minds are kind of heading.
We're all connected, yeah.
We're riding the same wave, you know.
And that's such a big, a big jump. Like, I know you kind of barely harped on it, like as far as like, I know you mentioned you guys are waiting. What are the technological advances that you're waiting for in terms of what do you think will make a big difference going forward? Because I know, like, on one hand, we've seen some developments as far as like slightly higher resolution, though, the resolution still isn't great. So that's not necessarily like I don't think, I haven't had anyone, like every now and then you show VR to someone and they'll mention that it looks a little blurry, but that's usually not the thing that holds people back, even with the lower. You mentioned locomotion before, and there's still not being a great solution for those problems yet. What is it what are our major problems right now that we need to solve for?
I think that first we have to be released from cables.
Okay.
Yeah, that's maybe the obvious first step.
I think like also there's a matter of cumbrance. I obviously have VR at home, and the ease with which I open a Pancake game, as opposed to the decision that I need to make in order to start a VR session.
I agree.
Partially has to do with the fact that I need to move a chair.
Yep.
But it's also like just putting the headset on. I have a Vive without like the what do you call it, the headset thing that makes it more comfortable.
The strap. Yeah.
And so I need to put on the headphones. I need to strap the thing in.
Yeah.
It's pretty heavy. It's
a commitment. It's a commitment.
It's a huge barrier of entry. And I think that just minimizing it, making it cordless, making it lighter and easier to wear. These are the things that we're looking at. Making it mobile, but that's already maybe also kind of stepping on the toes of AR and where AR is going.
Yeah. Okay. It's kind of funny because it's like a catch-22, because to bring in the gamer community, you need great content, but you also need great hardware, and in order to make great content, you need big budgets, and so you can see this funny loop, but the industry just strides forward.
It lifts itself by its own bootstraps. It just takes a while.
Yeah, so it takes a while, but we'll get there for sure.
Yeah, no, it's a unique position to be in, because when you look at the development of early video games just in general and how how slowly relative to VR, you know, those processes were allowed to develop. I mean, you look
Yeah.
at, the strides in software. I think from early VR titles to kind of what we're seeing now, I think are really big steps in a relative short amount of time. But for a lot of people out there, they just want, like, as soon as they try something, they want, you know, something
The one AAA PC game, you know.
yeah, and so it is a really challenging position to be in, and especially like I guess that's a good transition into talking about what it's been like for you guys to release on early access and then eventually release a title. What's that process been like to be able to from the beginning kind of show people what you're working on and develop over time with the community also being able to see what you're up to?
So I think that I'll say two contrary things. Our next game will probably not be early access,
Okay.
but Racket NX absolutely had to be early access, and we don't regret any of it for a moment. Our players really helped us with everything, especially in the uncertain, uncharted territories of early days in VR. Like many other VR developers, we had some really rough patches along the way. Basically, the game came out about 9 months after what we had hoped we could bring it. We could do it, and it wasn't because we weren't working fast enough.
Yeah.
And just having our fans cheering us basically and enjoying our game and getting it is really what held us together during this the tougher parts. So there's no question that bringing Racket out in early access was the right thing. We have amazing players that really helped us during the process and really helped keep things together. The reason we probably won't do it for our next game is that first of all, like I said, we really want to focus more on lore and narrative and stuff like that. That makes early access a little more difficult and complicated to make. But also, it feels to me like the coming period in VR of maybe a year, maybe even two, I'm reluctant to predict any big changes in hardware. All right, and I'm reluctant to predict any big changes in basic, let's say, media language in VR. So like, how do you do UI? How do you do mechanics? What works? What doesn't work? Locomotion styles, etc. So it feels to me that if we have a very short time in which we want to do something that is very high quality and has a lot of content in it, and it's going to take everything we have. And since we already feel pretty comfortable with a lot of the basics, if we can really focus on the game with beta testing and alpha testing and all this kind of stuff, but if we don't have to have something that is always playable, then I think that we stand a better chance of delivering a good product in the short amount of time that we have to deliver it.
So correct me if I'm wrong, but am I hearing that like it almost sounds like you want to make like the best VR title using like it's all like the culmination of where VR has gotten up to this point. You want to make the best of that, whatever that is.
No. We want to take it to the next step.
Next step.
We want
Okay.
to take it to the next step. We want to take everything that VR has gotten so far, and then use that as our stepping stone for the next step. Use all that we have learned and bite off the next chunk of what can be done in VR.
Got it. And not really like go in like figure out what that next step is by yourselves rather than waiting for someone to tell you what that is potentially going to be.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And again, I think that it has to do with story. I think that it has to do with lore. You know, having an interesting world to feel that you are part of, which is something that to me is very, very lacking in VR. Even games with the best mechanics, including Racket NX, obviously, is not, you don't feel like you're in a different reality that is intriguing and compels you to explore or puts you in a very like a nuanced mood or anything like that. And I think that VR has such huge potential in these realms that's one of the things that are most interesting to us right now.
This is going to be a kind of an interesting question, like as far as because I think it tells something about the future where you guys are looking at, and also kind of the past. What are some of the ways that we can attract kind of new players and a new audience for something that's already been introduced? The reason I say that is because, I mean, like with an early access title, for example, like I can only imagine, and I'm sure you can speak to it at more length, like maybe perhaps some of the difficulties of releasing a game in one state, and then, a year or two later, the game is now in a completely different state, and now how do you communicate that to people to potentially get new people that haven't jumped on board before interested in this, in what is essentially a different product than where it began, right? The challenge.
But are you talking about Racket and like the difference between the first release and the last release, or are you talking about Racket and a second game that comes later?
The second game that came later, and actually VR in general, because part of what I'm trying to get at, and I think this is all like an interesting set of challenges, is when you create certain expectations for people, what's the best way to break those expectations and to also get kind of a new audience? Because part of what you had mentioned earlier about the current state of VR, I mean, we do have a very, I think, interesting type of audience in the VR consumer space, because it's not really, like you said, it's not really representative of the average video game player. They're not like, a lot of them aren't just consumers. They're all, some of them are amateur developers, some of them are professional developers, some of them are like, they have unique kind of interests, and they've kind of developed their interest of VR over time into liking a lot of the tropes and conventions that have been presented to them at this point. There's such a big, and I'm more along the lines, it sounds like, of you guys, where I'm still not really convinced of most of, if any, of the locomotion systems that are out there so far. But there's a decent chunk of people out there with HMDs that are just convinced that using a thumb pad or a joystick to move around in a VR space is like the way to go. In a lot of these, and I think these are just like developments that have occurred, over this brief history of VR based on what's been able to be done. But moving forward, like you said, like you want people to be open to new ideas, new types of games, and these story-driven character games that you guys are working on that are hopefully the future of the medium. It's so different than I think what people have grown accustomed to playing in VR. So is it, from your perspective, is as a developer, do you just do your best to make the most engaging experience possible and hope that people are going to be on board? Or like what do you see as kind of the big challenge in opening VR to a more expansive audience, given where it's been so far? And
yeah, there's a lot to unpack there.
Yeah, no, that's, and I sometimes go overboard with, but these are just like ideas. Hearing you talk.
Yeah, so I think, first of all, if we can't challenge what is currently happening in VR already, all right, since it's just been like 2-3 years.
Yeah.
If things are already unchallengeable, then we are not in a good place.
Yeah.
All right. So I think for us it's like the tropes that work for us are fine. The ones that don't, we want to challenge.
Yeah.
One of the things that is sorely lacking right now, in my opinion, is that when I look at screenshots from VR games, they are never more compelling than screenshots from pancake games. All right. The only thing that could be more compelling is the fact that I know that they are in VR. And if I want to bring more people into VR, I really need to rely on the content and not on their technical enthusiasm. All right, I think. So it's not that the next game that we're making is a game that is meant for people who don't have VR yet, right? We are definitely like, I spent a lot of time trying to understand the VR community better, and I've been on Reddit every day, and I've been on Steam every day, and I talk with people in every opportunity that I get to, and with other developers, and trying to understand what kind of things people in VR like, why, and what's in common with the things that I like, because I'm not the technical. None of us are the typical VR enthusiast. None of us are tech junkies, let's put it this way, or none of us are. I think there's a good chance that all of us would have a VR headset at home, even if we weren't developers. But we would probably not be enthusiasts just yet, because we're very content oriented, as opposed to what Racket might suggest. So for us, it's really about doing a game that we would like to play and looking for what's missing for us right now in VR. Trying to, on the one hand, capitalize on the tropes that have been established and work well, avoid or challenge the tropes or the places where we feel that VR hasn't gotten to a good solution yet, sometimes even just trying to sidestep them or own them. And at the same time, try making something that is as compelling as games that we can play on the PC or on a console, because it's time. It's really time that we went to the next level with VR. That's my feeling, at least.
What do you think? And I don't want you to, talk about things that you're not ready to talk about yet or anything like that. But I mean, what are some of the advantages or some of the unique attributes of VR that you think could benefit storytelling? Because I'm like you. I love I love story-driven games. I love characters. I love like the types of game experiences. I'm not the kind of person that tends to spend like hours and hours in a multiplayer game. I'm more of a story-driven type of person, and I like more narrative. I like more narrative-focused video games, just point blank. And I'm just kind of curious on. I mean, I don't necessarily want to just see something that could be done well in a pancake game, like you said. I'm just transposed into VR.
That's right.
Exactly.
What do you think the VR medium can do for those types of experiences?
So I'd say first and foremost, immersion. It's just your identification with the character that you play, the sense of presence in your environment. All these things can really take things up a notch in terms of immersion. Your agency in terms of like where you're looking, what you're doing is much, much higher. That's like the obvious point. The second thing is that in terms of storytelling itself, so there's a lot of visual ways that can be explored in VR, and we're looking at several. I don't know if it's even something I can describe in an intelligible way right now.
Sure.
But the art of telling stories is one of the oldest arts in our culture. All right? And it's definitely novel to import that art into VR. And I think that even just taking the mechanics as we know them in VR and the things that we can only do in VR in terms of like the viscerality of the interactions and the physicality and all these kind of things that you can only do in VR, even just taking these things and
harness them to the story.
Yeah, exactly. And using them in service of telling a story, using the mechanics just like we do in normal games, but using VR mechanics in order to convey ideas and illustrate certain elements in the story, etc. These are the things that I'm interested in. I don't think there's going to be some revolution in story structure or character arcs or anything like that. There might be new visual methods, even though so far I've been pretty disappointed with what I've seen. It's usually just, the screen closes up a little bit and you see in a 2.5D movie or something like that. Not very impressive.
Yeah.
but hopefully we can do better than that. But again, it's the novelty is the remix. The novelty is the application of the new with the old and harnessing both disciplines, like what we know for VR mechanics and what we know about storytelling, to do things that we couldn't do before.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
I'll be able to tell you a little bit more in about a year and a half.
Okay. Well, that's hey, at least
It's an exploratory process for us as well, very much so.
Yeah.
No, that's exciting to hear, and it's awesome to just know that, you know, things are being. I mean, if anything, it really sounds like a big message that you're sending out to people is, you know, not to wait for other people to come up with the solutions to a lot of these problems. Like if you're a developer or if you're interested in the medium, you know, it's kind of on us as much as anyone to kind of figure out the potential.
Yeah, never wait around.
Yep.
If you're in VR and you're waiting around, some part of you is not in the right place.
Yeah, you need to get your hands dirty.
Awesome.
Sooner than later, yeah.
Well, I mean, I think that's a good, you know, place as any to kind of, you know, bring this discussion to a close. I wanted to thank you both for taking the time to speak with me and for, you know, such a great discussion. For people out there that haven't had a chance to play Racket NX yet, or, you know, people that want to kind of follow you guys as you work on your next project, what's the best way for people to do that?
So if anyone's interested in playing Racket, then obviously look up Racket on Steam or on Oculus Store. We have a Discord channel, just discord.gg/Racket NX, one word. And that's pretty much the best way to get into Racket. In terms of following our next game, currently we don't have anything that is public. When it will be public, and it'll probably take us a few more months, we'll probably spam it in Reddit and Steam and everywhere we can find. Hopefully, it will be appealing enough on itself to really carry through.
Okay,
Yep.
Well, great. Well, thank you guys again, and we'll be in anticipation to see what you guys come up with soon.
Yeah, thank you very much, Ronnie. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thanks, Ronnie.